nominating some folks for my chair. Be stepping down for at least, but be around for a little while. And then we have an RA update, and then we have some additional allocation discussions. It'll be a really short one on Old Tampa, or one of these is really short. The RA update's really short, I think. And then some, as always, some open discussion and then future meetings. So that said, I'm Jeff Greenwell. I work for Hillsborough County. I oversee environmental services group there. Water, wastewater, UIC. Thanks.
Good morning, Santino Provenzano. I work for Mosaic. I am the environmental director of our North America operations and happy to serve as the industry co-chair.
Good morning, David Glicksberg with Hillsborough County Environmental Services Division.
Troy Green, Hillsborough County Environmental Services Division.
Morning, I'm Marcus Beck. I'm the program scientist for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Brandon Johnson with Stantec.
Ashley Painter, City of Baltimore, Environmental.
Adam Wood, Hillsborough County Public Utilities, Environmental.
Juanita Bernal, Public Works, Pasco County.
Heather Maggio with the City of Tampa.
Ms. Laura Garcia with Southwest Florida Water Management District Swim Section.
Lydia Malcolm, Duke Energy.
Well, Yeagle, Duke Energy, I'm the field services for Bartow Power Line. Holly Peter, City of Lakeland Water Utilities.
Brennan White, Climber Burner Valley Environmental Division.
Aaron DeBacco, Kinder Morgan.
David Black, Kinder Morgan.
Good morning, Chris Pratt, Environmental Protection Commission, Hillsborough County.
Simon Bolin, Hillsborough County Extension.
J-Law, USF College of Marine Science.
Ranger Bowl USA.
Maya Burke, Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
And Ed Show, Director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. We also have a number of people online. You want me to call them out? We're going to call out the people online. If you want to just unmute yourself and say hello as I go through the list. Ali McGlory.
Hello. Yes, Manatee County Natural Resources.
Kelly. Bob Robertson.
Yeah, I'm Bob Robertson with Robertson Engineering.
Blake.
Hi, everyone. Blake Simmons, Environmental Social Scientist for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Joe Walsh. He was with the Hillsborough County Soil and District, Conservation District. Drew Boylson.
Good morning, Drew Boylson, Pinellas County Utilities.
Emma Dantas.
Hi all, Sam Adantis with Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Felicia Burks.
Good morning, Felicia Burks, EPA Atlanta, Region 4.
Grace Humphrey.
Hi, Grace Humphrey, USF College of Marine Science.
Greg Knopf.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Greg Knopf with Polk County Natural Resources.
Kevin Miller.
Hello, good morning. Kevin Miller, City of Largo Environmental Services.
Kevin O'Donnell. Kira Barrera.
Good morning, Kira Barrera, City of St. Petersburg Water Resources Department.
Lance Coates.
Lance Couts, DP.
Hi, Laura Wakefield, Pasco County Public Works.
RPC here. Patrick Mims.
Hello, everyone. Patrick Mims, T-Mims Corp. with the Laurel Lakes Development.
Pete Owens.
Oh, good morning and happy Friday, everyone. Peter Owens with Applied Sciences.
Ben Ross.
Morning, everyone. CEP.
Sarah Kessler.
Good morning, Sarah Kessler, Public Works with the City of Clearwater.
John McGinnis.
Good morning, Sean McGinnis, Lakeland Electric, City of Lakeland.
Shelby Buckman,
Shelby Boschman, City of Largo Utilities Director.
Barry Holster,
Morning, Sherry Hilster with Stantec.
Sarah Malone,
Hi, Sarah Malone with Applied Ecology.
Stacy Day,
Hello, Stacy Day, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Steve Bartell,
Good morning, Steve Bartell with Stantec.
Dax Smearsiak,
Good morning, Zach Smerzak with Black and Veatch.
and I missed you at the beginning, Emily Moore,
Emily Moore with Black and Veatch.
and Chris S.
It's Chris Kaye with Carter and K Engineering. I'm here for the Laurel Lakes discussion.
Chris. Roger King,
Yeah, Roger King with YAR North America.
Alex Manos.
Good morning, Alex Manos with Pinellas County Environmental Management.
I think it's everyone online, and I think before we jump into it, I just want to kind of set the stage of what our expectations are for this meeting. You know, we're at the stage of developing a reasonable assurance addendum to deliver to the department by early next year. It's kind of investigating what the issues are in Old Tampa Bay and how we could best address them moving forward in this reasonable assurance update. So we've been working through that process of identifying the existing paradigm, whether it still stands for Old Tampa Bay, and evaluating alternative indicators, targets, and thresholds. So a lot of that information is going to be shared with you in a preliminary fashion at this meeting, and then we're also going to kind of request your feedback as the consortium participants on water quality conditions that we've been experiencing in this RA cycle, and sort of the expectations moving forward in terms of meeting existing targets versus the need for newer targets. So that's a lot what we're going to ask from the consortium on and get your feedback on. We'll have an interactive Mentimeter at the end, but in the interim, we're just going to provide a lot of updates, and it should be a fairly quick meeting. Turn back over to you.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, I'm going to be stepping down as the co-chair for the publicly owned treatment work side of the NMC. Want to say what an honor it's been to be working with this group in Tampa Bay Estuary program for the last 25 years. They just do a Herculean lift constantly, and NMC itself, even though it's ad hoc, has just been committed to checking the bay. Just an unbelievable, outstanding resource. I can remember when I moved here in '88, the radio would talk about seeing one scallop in the bay, or a dolphin sighting, or an osprey sighting. Now you drive across the bridge this morning, I was coming across to Howard Franklin. I stopped counting at about a dozen ospreys. To go across 60, you see countless ospreys, just as a point of an anecdotal indicator of how much healthier the bay is. But there's still plenty of work to be done, and certainly in Old Tampa Bay, there is a huge lift in front of us collectively, and well, I need to step down because I need to make sure there's a capacity for transition here as I ultimately retire over the next couple of years. Old Tampa Bay is very concerning to me that would fracture this ad hoc alliance that we have. We sort of come from all sizes of public entities, all aspects of private industry, but we're all committed to the same thing, and that's protecting this incredible resource we all have the privilege to be part of. And it's really what I call joyful work, being involved in groups like this. With that said, I'll open the floor to nominations for my chair.
Folks are welcome to volunteer themselves or nominate a colleague.
Well, if no one will go, I actually spoke to her. I don't think she's on the phone, but I would like to nominate Michelle Duggan with Pinellas County, a former colleague of mine at FDEP. She has a pretty comprehensive understanding of both DEP's rules and a lot of Swift Mud rules. I think she would be very well suited for this. And that would be one nomination I would put forward to the committee.
And I would just like to say that I don't know of anybody who's more qualified than Michelle. Take check, please.
Are there other nominations or volunteers?
Good work, guys. Not a lot involved. We do a couple RFPs a year, maybe. That does require some attention and some reading, but as you guys know, everybody in here knows, great people to work with and be around. So again, like I said, joyful work. Got to be at least one more now. I know we have a relatively small group today, and it sounded like I couldn't quite hear everybody that was on the line, but it sounded like maybe more consultants than necessarily members online. So maybe.
Since Michelle's, what's that?
Do we have the quorum to be able to vote?
Well, since Michelle's not even here today to accept the nomination, I think that what we would need to do is sort of leave this out as an open item to be addressed at the next meeting and have a conversation with her, make sure she's here, make sure she accepts, and then we can make a decision about whether or not to formally accept at that time. But I wouldn't feel comfortable naming a new co-chair who's not here today.
We don't think we would vote. And maybe that's a way to go. The next meeting's slated for late October.
Yeah.
If anyone wants an opportunity to think about whether they want to commit to this and then reach out to Maya and let them know that they want to nominate themselves or someone else that they've spoken to that thinks that they're up for it. I think that's not unreasonable. Like I said, I'm not retiring tomorrow, but I did want to make sure there was some time for transition and for me to be around for questions to be asked of the public side of the chair, as well as sort of the history of sort of how we got here. I had the privilege of working on these Q-Bells with Charles Kovich with FDP and Jeff Hilton in the back, who's now with the city of Tampa. And we're about to lose a whole lot of institutional knowledge of how we got to where we are, but we're also about to face this huge hurdle in the hydraulic restrictions of Old Tampa Bay. It's hard for me to believe that we will not need to revisit the total load within Old Tampa Bay and potentially reallocate that load at some level. I felt this way 20 years ago. I still feel this way, and nothing in the last 20 years has changed my opinion.
We will discuss this and get everyone's opinion.
That's my opinion. And I don't want it to break this group up. This group has been so great. So I guess we'll put item number 2 aside for now. And if you want to nominate yourself or another colleague, please reach out to Maya over the next 60 days.
Yep, we'll leave the nominations open, reach out to me, and then at the October meeting, we will vote.
Maya, so we can have an effective October meeting. Would it be inappropriate to accept those nominations through some kind of open survey and then put those together for the meeting? If anybody wants to, we can obviously go through those and, if people want to ask questions of the folks that have either volunteered or been nominated.
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
All right, moving on to the RA update. Maya's going to speak to that.
This is just a brief update to let you know where we've been, because we've been reporting progress all along the way. Since our last meeting, we have not received any additional signed declarations, but 17 is about where we were at the last time we did one of these declarations of cooperation. So we don't really expect that number to change much going forward throughout the remaining portion of the RA cycle. Contributions, voluntary contributions from you all and your respective organizations are right now at the $186,250 dollars level. That's still short of our goal by a little more than $50,000 to be able to enter into a contract with a technical support contractor. In looking through those invoices that were sent out and that are remaining to be paid, we've identified around $50,000 worth that we think people have either communicated that they will be getting that payment to us prior to the October 15th deadline. So we think we're going to come in right about where we need to be, but if you are one of those entities that has not paid yet, expect a follow-up email from Ed or myself to just confirm that that payment is indeed planned and will be there so that we can confidently enter into an agreement with the technical support contractor. Any shortfall that is there that we don't receive sufficient contributions for, we will program into our annual work plan budget, and the Tampa Bay Estuary Program will take on that financial responsibility. So I did want to provide you all an update about the Reasonable Assurance Plan Update Technical Support Contractor. Earlier this year, we did open the RFP that you all reviewed, all of the tasks and the scope of work. Based on the responses that were received to that RFP, we received three highly qualified respondents, and of that, the review committee, which included representatives from the consortium itself, made their findings that Environmental Science Associates were the highest ranked respondent. Those recommendations were put forward to our management and policy boards, who have now authorized Ed to enter into a contract with Environmental Science Associates for an amount not to exceed $240,000 and $634. Environmental Science Associates, new name for the contractor, but really is a lot of the same faces. The team includes folks like Tony Janicki and Ray Pribble, as well as some familiar names like Daryl Joyner and some additional expertise from the ESA side of the house. So I don't know, Ilya, Ashley, Tino, or Adam, if you all had anything that you wanted to provide in terms of the review, but we're looking forward to getting under contract with them by October.
There were great submittals, all three. Yeah, very competitive.
Yeah, I mean, just from like a transparency perspective, we met as a review team on 2 occasions. We used a common rubric for all of the evaluations, did those independently, brought those back, as a group, and had a final discussion to kind of calibrate and make sure that we were all grading on the same scale, so to speak. As Ilya said, all of the proposals were very well thought out, and a little bit different, some proposals emphasize certain aspects of the work over others, but ultimately I'm speaking for the team here, obviously the review team, but feel like the ESA proposal best aligned with what we want to see happen over this next cycle. And certainly I'm happy if anyone who was involved in putting a proposal together that was not selected, if you'd like to discuss that, or I'm sure Ed has the background information, to make sure that this is a transparent process now and going forward. So just appreciate everybody putting the proposals together, because I know a lot of work goes into it, and we feel pretty confident moving forward with ESA.
Any words you wanted to offer, Ray?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
He's gonna put his head down and keep doing the work.
Long 30 years doing this.
Attaboy.
Before the next one, I do want to emphasize, if your entity hasn't signed the Declaration of Cooperation, or you don't know what the Declaration of Cooperation is, that's a really good and strong pledge to us as the consortium that we're committed to this process, being part of the RA process the next 5 years. So if your entity hasn't submitted a signed declaration, please work with us and try to get it through your approval process and get that declaration back to us. The membership of the consortium is about 45 entities, and so far, like Maya mentioned, we only have received 17 signed declarations. So I want to see a significantly higher number in terms of commitments to this RA process for this RA cycle.
And if you're unsure about the status of your organization, these hyperlinks, both for the signed declarations and the contributions, are reports that show who has signed and who has paid. And then one final reminder, at the last meeting, Marcus presented to you some of the ways that we are moving the compliance assessment work flows into our open science process. And so we're looking at ways to streamline some of the loading numbers. We report those to you on an annual basis, but we need you to provide those reports and those data to us in order for us to turn those loading estimates around in a timely manner. We received, I think, 3 or 4 of the loading reports after the last meeting. We know there's more of you, so if you haven't submitted those to Marcus yet, please take a moment and do that, because that'll help us have a handle on where things are at earlier in the 5-year process.
Yep. Yeah, and there is a reporting template online at our website, tpp.org, and go to the Nitrogen Management Consortium page. It's on the NMC tools. There's a link to the point source reporting template. So if you have domestic, industrial, material losses, you know, or MS4 permits where you have a point source, fill out those templates and please send it to me, because we cannot do our annual loading estimate reports to DEP without that information. So appreciate that soon.
Right here, go to tvp.org, to the boards and committees, Nitrogen Management Consortium. It's right here in the tool. Here's the reporting template. That was it.
All right, thank you, Maya. Okay, we're gonna do allocation updates. Is John, I didn't hear Coates on the line. Is he on the line, or are you covering?
I'm going to give the update for John. I've been in conversation with John Coates, who's been managing the closure of the Piney Point facility with the receiver for Donica at Donica Consulting. So just wanted to give an update. There's an expectation that through the full closure process and converting a lot of the closed cells to stormwater holding areas, that there's going to be a need for additional allocation for the Piney Point facility. Right now, they're still ascertaining what the total need might be based on antecedent rain conditions in the future. So this is going to be part of the consortium's process to update the RA and kind of talk about allocations moving forward, not only relevant to Old Tampa Bay, but now for some of these other entities and other bay segments. So just want to give this preview to the consortium that we're expecting the department, John, to come to consortium meetings and kind of provide a proposal. We have a decision memo that we crafted back in the 2012 RA update that outlines a process to develop allocations for new missed or allocations that might be adjusted in the future. We've only exercised that process once. Technically through the consortium is actually a Duke groundwater transfer in the Old Tampa Bay segment to some upgrades they did at their plant. But for this RA cycle, we're expecting a number of entities to propose changes to the allocation tables, and Piney Point is going to be one of them. I don't think the need is going to be huge, but they are in the lower Tampa Bay Bay segment, which doesn't have much allocation to begin with. And our process to identify a need for allocation was some sort of transfer between entities that do have available allocation, or identifying a project that generates some credit. So I think they're still working through that process of how to propose that to the consortium. And then as a body, I think because we have no sort of authority, we're meeting ad hoc as a nitrogen management consortium. The only thing that our process dictates is that we make a sort of a recommendation whether it's aligns to the reasonable assurance process. So we'll be working through that on several fronts, like I said, and Piney Point's one of them. There's that expectation that there could be some additional allocation need for stormwater loads from the facility once it's fully closed. So just wanted to provide that quick update, and more to come probably at the October meeting on that. And you have several other entities in terms of similar discussions. I think Emily Moore is online, talking about Polk County and a new facility that they're contemplating in Polk County. So Emily, if you're online, if you wanted to briefly kind of give an overview of what is being.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, Emily Moore with Black and Beach, and Zach and I, we are working with the TMIMS Corporation on looking at a surface water discharge for treated wastewater from a small proposed wastewater treatment plant in Polk County. It's southwest of Mulberry. And we do have a presentation that will help us walk through the details.
Yeah.
And I guess sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I could give you control if you want to start sharing.
Okay. And I know that Zach, if he could get control to share, that would be great. Okay, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And thank you for allowing us to walk through this with you today. So as I mentioned, Emily Moore, and then it's Tom and Patrick Mims that we are working with on this project. Also Chris Kay, who's on the phone, he is also working on this project. So just a little bit of background, Zach, yeah, if you'll go to the next screen. We will go through a little more expanded project description. We'll identify the site location, talk through some of the anticipated water quality of this treated wastewater, the surface water that we're anticipating we would discharge into, and its flow path to the upper prong of the Alafia River. And then we'd like to get into a discussion with your group related to the allocation process, and then talk through next steps. Obviously, we've got to get things permitted through the FDEP, so we will talk through that a little bit as well. So to give you guys an idea of where this site is located, so it is the green dot. You can see it's southwest of Mulberry. And the Mims Corporation, they own this property. It's out, well, like I said, out in the southwest area of Mulberry, still within Polk County. And the development that is proposed for this site, for Laurel Lakes, is 1,700 mobile homes. Per Senate Bill 64, that there is an exception that does allow for discharge from a wastewater facility that is serving mobile homes. And then the flow from the facility, average flow, would need to be less than 300,000 gallons per day. So based our review of Senate Bill 64, this facility would meet that requirement. We are looking at a membrane biofilm reactor package plant facility. The treated wastewater is proposed to be discharged into an existing surface water called 40-acre lake. And as I mentioned, it eventually does discharge into the upper prong of the Alafia River. And then obviously, this is within our Hillsborough Bay watershed. And then looking at a deeper dive into the actual kind of flow path from the facility. Actually, Zach, if you'll go to the next slide first, and then we'll go back. So to give you guys an idea of how the water does make it into the Alafia, that there's a series of weirs that guides the water north out of 40-acre lake, that is County Road 640. And then the water would be flowing north through an existing wetland mitigation bank into the Alafaya. So that's kind of a general description, and I'll stop there to just see if you guys have some questions. And if not, we'll go back a screen and then we'll get into some of the, well, obviously what we're all interested in is the nitrogen loading that could be anticipated to Tampa Bay. So Zach, if you'll go back one screen and we'll talk through the wastewater treatment, talk through an example project that already has a surface water discharge to the Alafaya, and Zach's going to walk us through some of these details.
Yes, so we are actively engaged with FDP. We've had a number of conversations with them on the effluent limit, and we're meeting with them again with the Tallahassee office on Monday to discuss the water quality based effluent limit process and what information we need in order to determine what that effluent limit will be. In parallel to working with DEP, we reviewed the city of Mulberry's effluent limits due to their proximity to our location, as well as to the proximity of the discharge. And based on their permit, on the screen, you can see that their permitted amounts with a total nitrogen of less than 3 milligrams per liter. And based on the review of the original 2009 and the updated reasonable assurance plan, I believe they have an allocation of 2.4 tons of nitrogen per year. And so we're collecting as much data as possible for an idea of what the limits of our proposed package plant will be.
Right now, this would be a standalone permit for the mobile home park that's being constructed. That's what's being proposed.
That's correct.
And I have a question. So would those limits be applicable to the discharge into the lake or to the discharge into the Alafaya? Do we know?
I mean, that's Grizzle Fig. This is not.
The lake is part of
This is
Grizzle Fig?
Fig.
Okay.
Mulberry got a waiver from TP. So they would need to demonstrate a waiver from TP.
That's fair.
My old regulatory hat on. The Q-Bell would be our Q-Bell, the one we end up owning, which is actually a load limit, not a concentration limit. And the last time I checked, they had to get that load from some other entity discharging into Hillsborough Bay.
Yeah, for background, the consortium, when we went through the process of developing allocations back in 2009, we basically fully allocated all the bay segments to the TMDL load that was established by EPA back in 1998. So as Jeff mentioned, our process to identify new mist or updated source of nitrogen would be to try to identify where transfer or credit can be generated, or some other means to still stay under that 1451 TMDL limit for Hillsborough Bay watershed. Simon, you have a question?
So maybe, I'm not familiar with the site, but most of the surrounding land is mosaic. We have a mosaic representative. And most of that is in pasture or grasses. Why don't they do a land application program and put cows out there? Instead of discharging to the lake, just irrigate some pasture with effluent and then put cows out there to eat the grass. Then there's no or very limited discharge to Tampa Bay.
It is something that we have considered and that we still do consider. Obviously, that would take amount of acreage in the right areas to make that happen. I think at this point, from what we've seen so far, is that I think as you're indicating, you know, land application, more say like a spray field, would potentially work. We're not so sure about rapid infiltration basins due to the elevation of the groundwater. It is pretty close to the surface. So,
You could do a spray field, or you could have a dewatering lagoon and move solids off or semi-solids off the site. And there's plenty of companies and opportunities to do that, whether it's a mile down the road or 20 miles down the road.
Emily, this is Santino. A question. You mentioned the Q-Bell. Have you finalized kind of a plan of study with DEP? And if so, do you know, well, one, has that notice been published at this point, or are you still working to that stage?
we're still working to that stage. We have met with DEP Tampa office, and we have a meeting scheduled for this Monday, August 26th, to speak with the Tallahassee DEP folks. So we are in active conversations with them. I mean, obviously, you guys are a player in that conversation because DEP would need the assurance from the consortium that the allocation is available to allow for the discharge.
Emily, this is Jeff. I'm not sure why the department, and maybe somebody from the department on the line can talk about it. This is a statutory discharge into Grizzlefig waters. There is no requirement for a Q-Bell. There's a straight up requirement to meet the T-Bell in the statute, 5531, with the option of with the possibility of getting a phosphorus waiver based on the ratio of phosphorus to TN in the receiving water body, which is what Mulberry was able to do. Because this portion of our watershed is nitrogen limited, not the other way around. So typically you can only get those in marine water bodies. Mulberry was able to do it because of the nature of Golden Valley Lake in the vicinity of their discharge on the Alafaya. So I'm not sure why I mean, you do need the Q-Bell, but you need the Q-Bell from the perspective of the Tampa Bay Regional Assurance final orders. The Hillsborough Bay final order is where you need a Q-Bell, which is straight up load allocation, which would, in my estimation, would be getting one of the other entities presently allocated for load in that bay segment to say, I can give you X amount of tons per year. But the water quality stuff is a statute.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, call me, Emily.
Yeah, I think, in talking with the Tampa group, I mean, they did acknowledge that the Tallahassee folks, that they're the ones with more experience with these types of permits. So, yeah, so we will check that, double check the statute and talk through that with the Tallahassee folks on Monday. Regarding the ask of other entities for nitrogen allocation, do you have a recommended process that others have used for these types of asks?
I think, Emily, I mean, you could work through us and we could identify contacts, appropriate contacts, and kind of work through the allocation process that has been established for the Bay segment, who might be within compliance of their current allocation, might have room to offer a transfer or some other means of providing an allocation to this facility. So continue to work with us and then we could go from there. This is Ed from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Okay, Ed. Yeah, thank you.
So Emily, I'm guessing the lake is waters of the state?
Now that's a good question. Well, it is a lake from phosphate mining operations in the past.
Yeah, Swift Mud likes to call those waters of the state even.
Okay.
But I'm just thinking that if the outfall from the lake is just an emergency outfall, maybe you can get around all of that. I don't know how much. Seems like 300,000 gallons a day is awful lot for 1,700 mobile homes. But anyhow, I mean, if you have a stormwater discharge from a pond that receives effluent, that's treated differently than an NPDS. I mean, it's still an NPDS discharge, but it's not treated the same way. As far as your limits and everything. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate it. I think DEP may be a little rusty with the surface water discharge permitting. So I think it's going to be a process of, well, I mean, obviously we're going to reference the statutes, the regulations, and just walk through it, because obviously this is not an everyday ask.
Who you been working with at the department so far?
Primarily, JJ Loesch. Zach, did I get his last name properly?
Yes, Gerald Loesch.
Okay, Gerald Loesch. And then some of the other folks in the Tampa office. Yes, we have not spoken directly with the Tallahassee folks yet. And like I said, that is happening on this Monday.
Hey, Ed, just another comment. There's plenty of clay settling areas, which would make an excellent dewatering lagoon there in the area, and pumping that effluent into a dewatering lagoon and evaporate some of that water off makes less volume, at least, to use than wherever you need to, versus pumping it into a lake and making the whole lake effluent.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you for that. I appreciate that you guys are thinking through this with us. I know that we internally have been wrapping our head around different options. So to hear some other discussion has been beneficial. We appreciate that.
Again, I think this is introduce this to the consortium and work through the process. This is a new one in terms of a new source to the watershed. So I don't think we're going to solve anything in one meeting, but these are conversations that we need to continue to have with the development group as well as the department and Emily's group. So we appreciate you guys presenting this information, but please keep us abreast if you want us to be involved with conversation with the DEP in terms of how it might interface with the reasonable assurance process. We're happy to do that as actually program staff to help facilitate those discussions.
Okay, that's good. And Ed, was that you speaking?
Yes.
Okay, and Ed, just real quick, Zach, if you'll just get to I think it's part of the last or second to last slide. So Ed, just, if we are successful in getting an allocation from another entity, what is, I'm just trying to think of the schedule for something like that in your experience. You know, how long has that typically taken in the past? And again, in your experience?
Yeah, it was like I mentioned, you know, the consortium has no regulatory authority. Basically, as a body reviewing this as potentially aligning with the reasonable assurance update that we'd submit to the department in 2027. That's basically the assurance you'd get in the consortium. It's the department's prerogative of whether or not to issue a permit based on any evidence of offsets or transfers that you might produce in response to that permitted facility. So our next meeting is in October, and then we have a series of meetings shortly after that, November, December, related to other topics. So I think there'd be opportunity to ask for that sort of concurrence from the consortium over the next calendar year.
Yeah, I'll add to that if that's okay.
Yep.
Just from the industrial wastewater perspective, the load allocations were incorporated into MPDS permits as enforceable limits. So if you were to find an entity to trade with, for lack of a better term, the two entities would likely have to, you know, kind of confer with DEP, and that would require permit modification for the existing entity, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it would require a modification to the final order for the Hillsborough
Base
segment.
Yeah.
So you would also be required to do that. I mean, even right now, the next topic, we're being required to modify our permit for a temporary transfer. So certainly a long-term permanent transfer would be both permit modifications to Tina's point, as well as I believe, you know, a modification, an opening of a modification to that final order for the Hillsborough Bay Q-Bell.
So to your original question, Emily, on timing, just from a permit modification perspective, my personal experience over the last 5 or 6 years is that some of those permitting timelines that we used to hold, you know, generally is true are not true anymore, and it really is not something that can be easily anticipated. I think minor, major modifications 10 years ago, we were probably getting those in 18 months, and we have even some routine industrial wastewater permit renewals now that are now into their second permit cycle with complete applications and no action by the department. So for that particular aspect of the process in a reallocation scenario, I don't think anybody can really commit you a solid time frame.
I think from the point of view of how it fits into the reasonable assurance plan, I think, you know, just the initial process of bringing this to the consortium and find concurrence is the first step. Formalizing that in the next reasonable assurance update, which isn't due to the department until December 31st, 2027, as a recommendation from the consortium on how to move forward over the next 5-year implementation period, would then sort of prompt the department to investigate opening the Q-Bell and/or permits at that point. So that would be sort of the consortium process that we would align to, and you know, the shortest sort of timelines in terms of a reasonable assurance recommendation.
And I guess one other thing, Amy, you really didn't mention the changes that Senate Bill 64, you know, 43064 are requiring, which is a demonstration that you're beneficially reusing, or you are meeting an MFL, or there's about 4 or 5 exceptions. I didn't, obviously wasn't a comprehensive presentation, but I didn't hear it in this presentation, and that would require this outfall, if it could even be permitted, to go away by December 31st, 2031.
It's too small to.
If that's been addressed or not.
I think it's too small to qualify. 164.
300,000 a day?
Is it 100,000 or is it, I thought it was half a million. No, I meant the.
300,000, yeah.
Isn't that half a million? I thought it was half.
So the 300,000 is specific to state-defined mobile home parks.
Oh, they probably do qualify low income, you're right.
So they probably don't have to meet 64.
True.
And I just want to clarify, Jeff, that's all based on the fact that the 40-acre lake is classified as a natural lake. And that's the outfall we're discussing, or is it that it's classified as a stormwater facility and then the outfall from that, from the facility?
I do
mean,
not know the answer to that. Just curious. But I would bet it's a lake because it's showing up on the I think that was the USGS layer she was showing.
But she stated that it was created as a result of fertilizer.
That's an old mining pit, but that
old
doesn't
mining
necessarily mean they don't qualify it as waters of the state, because I've seen Swift Mud say that they're waters of the state. I've run into that in the past.
Absolutely, that's a different lift. but-
Whether it is or it isn't is you gotta find out.
And I don't think they're waters of the state, but.
That's my opinion.
Emily, you implied and showed that one figure that there was a flow path offsite into the North Prong, correct?
Yeah,
Correct. Can you guys see that?
yes.
Yeah, so irrespective of the regulatory status of that particular initial receiving water, it's going to surface waters.
Yeah, but is it a continuous discharge? That's the question.
Yeah, see, that's what would make a
Right.
difference if it was an intermittent.
Yeah.
Yes, it's intermittent, it's seasonal.
Yeah, you should.
This land counts with the DEP, even if it's a previously mined activity, as Tino knows, a lot of times for abandonment of those activities, those pits get reconnected to surface waters, in which case kind of that surface water classification extends to it whenever it gets reconnected to waters of the state.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing from you, Ed, is in terms of the consortium's role here is they're gonna have their meetings with DEP, but we can help connect them with other allocated entities within that basin. And then it becomes, I don't think the consortium has a role beyond that. It's more entity to entity discussions if there were to be an opportunity for a reallocation.
Yeah, the only thing under the decision memo is, whatever final agreement is developed,
Obviously,
that you would bring it back to the consortium. Ask the consortium whether it concurs with the tenets of the reasonable assurance.
Did you tell her the number on that decision memo or?
Yeah, they referenced it and provided it too.
So for some of the new folks in here, in the process of developing the reasonable assurance, we had about 30 decision memos that were generated through over the, I guess, 5 or 6 years of getting to the reasonable assurance final orders. They each sort of take on different topics. One of them is at the time, trading was prohibited in the state of Florida, except in the lower St. John's. No longer prohibited anymore, but there's a decision memo out there that sort of wordsmiths their way around that prohibition, because the expectation was that that would be lifted. It was lifted, but there is a decision memo that sort of outlines how to go about swapping loads.
Those decision memos are on the consortium website.
Okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Formalize and memorialize how we got through different hurdles we faced from whatever, 2003, I think, 09, as we worked our way through this process. Yeah, I guess the worst thing after that, but the final.
Yeah, so this was during the 2012 RA update. We developed this decision memo. New missed or expanded sources. Yeah, it just kind of outlines the process of the entities bringing this information to the consortium kind of considering whether it follows the tenets of the reasonable. And we provide this to Emily's group, Emily and Zach already.
Anything else, Emmy?
No, I think that's it. No, yeah, today, yeah, Ed, thank you for this information. And then we will reach out to you, Ed, directly for potential entities to approach. And appreciate everybody's input and listening to our presentation today. Also, I failed to mention Bob Robertson with Robertson Engineering. He's also part of our team. So I think that's it from us.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I guess that brings it back to me again. I was pretty quick. Back in April, Adam and I were approached by an operator that felt that there was something wrong with the influent flow meter at our Falkenberg facility. Adam did a lot of work to sort of try to back calculate what that flow was. The operator was correct. Flow was reading approximately 2 million gallons a day lower than it should have been. It put us just over the permitted threshold for that facility, which is a 12 MGD facility. We have the capacity to transfer about 2.5 million gallons a day from one of our supermasters to the city of Tampa. We've entered into a contractual agreement to do that on a temporary basis until such time as we can get that plant expanded and divert other flow off of that plant. As a component of that deal, Tampa needed to acquire the load associated with that flow. So we are transferring 1.44 tons a month to Tampa to make them whole with regard to that flow transfer. You don't anticipate it to be for the duration of a permit cycle or an RA cycle. So therefore, we don't think that it needs to be ultimately captured in the QBell itself or changed in the QBell. We'd only have to change it back. Working with both of us both the city and the county are working with the DEP right now to modify the permits to accommodate this transfer on a monthly basis. Where we're at with that one. Any questions?
Jeff, I agree with the kind of the concept of it falling within a cycle, right?
Right.
So it really doesn't make sense to do something more permanent, but will there be something incorporated into your permit by DEP that puts like a schedule requirement in or something like that?
Well, the permits, the minor mods, I think are just gonna accommodate how that transfer is formalized, so that basically we're both solvent basically with the transfer, sort of somewhat of, I won't say it's largely a paper exercise from that perspective. There is an expectation that we will get specific schedules. I'm not sure what kind of form that document would be in for expanding the plant. We are taking a contractor to expand the plant. We already have an emergency contract in place to do a lot of the front end work, and we're hoping to have we're in a cone of silence right now, but we're hoping to have a contractor on board in the next 60 days to start that expansion. We had some good things already in place. The plant headworks was already rated for 15. The clarifiers were already rated for 15. The biological units have the capacity to do 15. So we really just need to expand our filters and our disinfection process. So we're hoping to have it all done and possible. In the meantime, we're through the good graces of the city. We're diverting 2.5 or so million a day to them.
Yeah, we're both modifying our permits to reflect.
Yeah, we're both modifying our permits to mobilize out. We're trying to figure out the best way to do that with them right now.
Permit is a whole nother question.
It's a weird, sort of a strange situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only thing we talked about is fully understanding when the transfer was in place, so that at the end of this 5-year cycle, we would understand what the actual allocation compliance numbers would be that we report back over the 5-year period.
One of the thoughts out there would be to simply allow Tampa to deduct 1.44 from their actual load and add 1.44 to our actual load. That seems to be the cleanest permitting approach. It all goes into Hillsborough Bay, actually relatively close to each other. Think about it, only a few miles apart from each other. We haven't been able to get into that level of detail with the district yet. But that's what we think is the cleanest, easiest way to do it.
Yeah, it'd just be understanding when the temporary transfers were taking place and within an annual period.
So you'd see a modification to the discharge monitoring report that would indicate on the month, which we already have already in our Falkenberg permit that predated the need to transfer the load. There was already a place in our daily discharge monitoring report that indicated whether we went to the city or not. Because we've gone to the city in the past in order to take a unit down and do maintenance on that unit. The city, it's not appropriate for the city to not get some load for that transfer. County clearly recognizes that. We all entered into the agreement last month. Now we're just trying to figure out how to make it properly paper it with the department so that you guys can use it as well. You have questions on that?
No, I mean, it maybe stating the obvious, but I mean, just really, it's an account.
It's an accounting thing.
It's the same base segment, and like you said, the discharge locations themselves are actually
Pretty darn
together.
close.
Yeah.
We're at the top of the Palm River and we're at the bottom of the Palm River. Hate to qualify that as a river, but it is how it shows up on the map, even though it's 40 feet deep and 300 feet wide and only 2 miles long, 3 miles long.
But I mean, no question in your mind, Jeff, that those improvements are gonna take place within this.
No question at all.
Okay.
And that would move us, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to field any questions on it. Unfortunately, I know way too much more about it. We can move on to the old Tampa Bay, one that remains of concern to me.
Well, I do have one more question on this topic.
Okay.
So this is a little bit different than I think what's addressed in the decision memo that we have from 2012. Do we need something for this type of situation?
The 2009 addendum talked about transfers between entities within the same bay segment. So I think there's sort of already applicable sort of guidelines for that.
But even like the temporary piece within an RA cycle, I think what you're speaking to, Ed, is more of a permanent.
Yeah. We could develop a decision memo and bring it back to the consortium in October if you think that's warranted for temporary transfers that occur within cycle. I have to go back and look at the 2009 addendum and see if it might fall under that.
I mean, is it likely that this will happen again with another couple of entities, or do you think this is a pretty special case and we don't need to spend the time to do that?
Well, it could happen again with this entity on a much more temporary basis. I could envision that. I don't think that you might happen on any kind of long-term basis.
Yeah, I'm not trying to create work, Ed. I'm just thinking in terms of like defensibility of that decision.
Yeah,
Down the road.
We haven't done a decision memo in quite some time, so I'd be happy to draft that up and bring it to the October meeting.
We're all focused on this, where I'm focused on this one, but was another small component of this that's a permanent transfer because we obtained Pebble Creek, which was a small privately owned wastewater plant that discharged up in the Morris Bridge area. It had a 4.4 tons on its 5-year rolling average. We never consolidated it into our consolidated load for Hillsborough Bay. But Tampa takes all that wastewater now, so we also transferred that 0.4 tons to them in this agreement, and it is also going to be captured in the permit mods that Jeff is doing on his side. It won't be captured in my permit mod, so that is out there as well. I guess that's a good question for the consortium, is that what is the threshold to open up a final order to make a change like that? It's largely a de minimis change in my mind. Yeah, in particular, what's your allocated load? 215-ish tons every 5 years?
213 now.
213, talking about
Yeah, we're gonna have to do something to
0.1% or something.
modify some of
Where you
these,
draw the line on that.
because at some point, we're gonna have to address it, because we get flow from CSX
Do we, right.
that also has an allocation. We potentially may get a load from Kinder Morgan, which would be another one. I mean, we're not talking about huge tonnages, but we're talking about tons.
So you could wrap those things in, to Tina's point, you could wrap it, you could put a decision memo together.
We can't really afford to take all that flow and not get something for it.
Right.
I think there's,
Again, it's an accounting thing, right? And not,
but there's been a lot of this drift over the past few
Yes.
RA cycles, and we've sort of been waiting to address them, and I think that we're sort of getting to a critical mass where we all need to have these conversations and make a decision together on it.
absolutely, and
And the problem is.
Especially with Daryl Joyner being gone.
Affects the remaining load that's allocated to the percent allocation. That it just ripples through the entire table for a base segment, even minor changes.
yeah, agreed. And I think in the CSX Rockport, that's a stormwater.
It's a stormwater driven
Load,
discharge.
and
They
it's getting
discharge
transferred
sometimes
to
some
a-
massive amounts of nitrogen to us.
Yeah, it transferred to a point source load.
Yeah, it's a matter of accounting if it's, the fixed allocations that were taken off the top. If it all remains in there, it should not affect the other parties within a base segment. But if one of those entities has a percent allocation, then that's gonna affect the rest of the table.
No, I agree. And maybe that's something that needs to be looked at. And where is that threshold, to Maya's point, where, okay, we've had enough of this drift to it's time to actually expose ourselves by opening up that final order and rectifying this accounting, what is largely an accounting issue, at least in Hillsborough Bay. It's Hillsborough Bay is really the main one where we experience it, although I guess we've got
Got a new
Piney
source.
Point and Lower Tampa Bay. We have the Bartow facility in Old Tampa Bay. Of course, Old Tampa Bay is a whole different story.
Total load to Hillsborough Bay is way below the load. And definitely the city should be getting some kind of credit for taking stuff like CSX. We're treating that discharge that would have been way higher nitrogen down to meet AWT limits.
You have a lot of moving parts in this discussion, and might want to put a subcommittee together to talk about it. I don't know. I mean,
Certainly, when we bring the contractor on board, we're gonna have to develop recommended allocations for the next 5-year cycle. And any of these changes and how they might ripple through the entire base segment table, we kind of have to walk through.
And it also might be a good idea to try to think about looking at this with Daryl Joyner now working for them, that we have someone who really knows the ins and outs of all of that. And can convey it to the DEP.
And I will make sure that that task and the scope of work in the contract is appropriately resourced and laid out.
yeah, because Jeff and I wrote those Q-Bells with Charles, and you got Joyner who approved them, and you have literally no one else at the department that even maybe even in some ways knows they exist.
You know, as Maya just mentioned, there's been drift since 2009 and 2010 when those final orders were developed. So it's now whether or not we want to head that off in this RA cycle or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were written in 07 and signed in 09, and, you know, 15 years down the road now, guys. I mean,
Well, I mean, but look, we're not talking about moving loads from segment to segment.
No.
We're, and I understand the hesitancy to kind of reopen anything that took so long and so much work to get hammered out and formalized, but there's gotta be a way that's kind of low risk to the consortium. I mean, like we said, it's an accounting thing. We want to be accurate, you know, but it's not materially changing the regulatory framework, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have to go through the process and demonstrate to the department that over the next 5 years, if we abide by these allocations, which account for these transfers, that we're still gonna be below the TMDL. If we provide that to the department, it's probably gonna be significantly different than what's in the key bill final order. And that's where the department has to make a decision on what process they need to undertake to make those updates.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Tina, but I'm gonna tell you right now, Charles and Deborah Getzoff and I were all holding our breath all the way through the petition period when those things were signed. Because we didn't know if someone would feel like they were, you know, being taking the brunt of an illegal takings by fully allocating the entire load across each of those watersheds. I was shocked that we did not get a petition. Not internally to the people that had all been made solvent, but for somebody on the outside that said, oh, well, I want to ultimately do this with this property and now I won't be able to do that. And I bought it for these purposes.
And that remains a challenge as we see the development footprint expand and you see, you know, the potential for
right
new players who want an in, basically. Yeah, I do think these things are really important though, and I think, you know, you've had good stability over time, and that's sort of allowed people to go on cruise control, trust the program, trust the RA, and like let it be what it is and avoid some of these things. I think we need to sort of like heed Santino's warnings about how we keep everybody on the same page and be cautious about the really important partnership that we have formed here. So we don't want to unwind that. But I do think we're gonna have to make some maybe hard decisions, and we're gonna have to be candid with each other. And if you don't know this stuff inside and out, I think we're gonna be pushing you to stretch to be an expert, like some of the folks who've been doing this work for decades. And so I kind of am hearing that these things are coming and just trying to provide that context, which may be obvious to you all, but in case it's not, I'm making it plain.
All right.
Sorry about that last.
No, I thought it was a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot going on here, and I think Maya's right on point about how far we've moved. It's hard to see how far we've moved. It's literally been 15 years. And it's been, you know, hesitate to say death by 1,000 cuts, but a bunch of little things. And after a while, all those little things start to be not so little anymore. So that said, we're going to hear about Old Tampa Bay, similar capacity. Sorry, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. I'm Brandon Johnson with Stantec, and it was actually a good segue, you know, the discussion of the consortium and the effort and years and work that's gone into this, you know, and the RA process, you know, the idea behind that is that, you know, these measures are protective of the Bay. So, you know, it's certainly an endeavor worth undertaking. We're going to talk a little bit about Old Tampa Bay, where that process is not being reflected as much in some of the ecological outcomes. And that kind of underlies the reason for the project. They're getting.
They want to see.
Yeah, now they want to see. I was counting on you guys facing the other way. So, yeah, today's update is on task 2. If we had a chance to speak with you all on task 1 as well as the TAC a little bit. And if you were at those presentations, we dug into some details and got into some of the technical analysis. I'm taking a little bit of a different approach today for task 2. One of those reasons is my teammates are, I refer to them as like the fork and the knives of the team. They're the ones that do that technical work. And today you got the spoon. So I'm going to try to keep a little different angle on it and maybe talk about some of the higher level outcomes. We'll get into some details too, but I'm going to start first. The arrow's not working.
Click in there first and then.
So yeah, we're gonna run through just a brief recap on task 1 and then get into task 2, which is focused on the indicators, thresholds, and targets for those allocations are based on. Just really quickly, in task 1, we looked at the existing paradigm, examining that, tried to see what a reevaluation of that management paradigm, what options could be investigated. We were looking for ideas to help us discover maybe some of the disconnects up in the old Tampa Bay segment. Through that, some of the ideas that came out, and again, that task 1 report, I believe, is on the SWIP programs Google Drive.
In the library.
In the library as well. So you can dig into that, but the concept of re-examining the hydrological normalization of TN loads. Again, looking at the management paradigm, looking ahead to options, trying to take a look at Lake Tarpon and its effects in that bay segment specifically, and then trying to dig down into some of the causal analysis to determine some linkages between the components of the management paradigm. So moving forward to task 2, our goal here was to take a look at the indicators, thresholds, and targets. And so I thought it'd be good just to revisit this and make sure we're all on the same page. But the indicators are the measurable water quality or ecological variables that are the not necessarily endpoints, but the items or variables that will be affected by the management decisions. Thresholds are the regulatory mandates. When we look at these values, primarily with regard to water quality standards, and then the targets are the non-regulatory criteria that are known or assumed to have significance to the ecological outcomes specifically. As Ed put it when we were talking the other day, a good way to think of that are thresholds at the level at which negative effects or harm may be expected. And the targets are the level where you'd hope to achieve ideal conditions. So first task was to look at existing indicators, and you all should be very familiar with these by now. I'm sure these have taken up more of your lives than you had ever anticipated. But we've listed the existing indicators on the left-hand side. The second column is essentially if it's a threshold or a target based on those definitions, and then what those criteria are. And then the third column is just a snapshot of a look at the historical data. Which I'll just caveat here that this task is still a work in progress. If you see numbers or errors or corrections, please let us know. We are still working on this, but appreciate any comments that'll come out of this discussion. we're gonna,
I just want to call your attention to the column that identifies whether or not we've been meeting the target or threshold and how frequently out of the last 10 years. That kind of highlights where some of the disconnects that we've been observing are occurring. So for example, we've only met the absolute loading target for Old Tampa Bay 3 out of 10 years. And we've only met the chlorophyll A management target for 3 out of the 10 years. So that disconnect, we're trying to identify, is there a relationship between some of those things where we can tweak so that we produce the outcomes that we are hopeful we're expecting.
yeah, thanks, Maya. And that's really gonna underpin some of the discussion we have here in the next slide or two.
And the majority of these existing indicators, there's no change proposed.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. And that's, I'm gonna have you skip over the top line there and then kind of look through. So the majority of these indicators, as Maya just said, we are not proposing a change, but jumping back up to the top, that's the total nitrogen. That is one that we're in the process of investigating a little bit further. And so we're trying to look at those scenarios, and it's a expression of those, the threshold and the target, or the thresholds in both the federal TMDL and the NNC that we're gonna be talking about. So as you know, the TN threshold is expressed in the NNC as hydrologically normalized delivery ratio of nitrogen. That threshold relies on hydrologic load from a reference period. Down to that. So that 92 to 94 reference period, the hydrologic load down there, graph on the bottom that shows where that's at. And it, as you guys understand, that hydrologic normalization allows for adjustment of that load based on that adjustment of the nitrogen load based on that hydrological load per year. And what that essentially does, in other words, in wetter years, when the hydrological load is increased, the normalization process allows the TN to exceed the regulatory threshold based on that delivery. And as Maya pointed out, the graph in the top, what's showing here is the red dots down below are the normalized loadings, whereas the blue line and dots up above are total nitrogen in the bay. And you can see the dotted line is the regulatory threshold. And you can see just based on that, that's where those 3 out of 10 years compliance with that occurs. So getting back to our recommendation, or what that change is that we're talking about. Essentially, we're talking about going to an absolute load rather than a hydrologically normalized load or a non-normalized load. There are a couple options with that, but the concept there is that through the conceptual model of reduced nitrogen equates to reduced chlorophyll, increases light attenuation, and results in seagrass, supportive of seagrass coverage. We do have that disconnect with the chlorophyll A target and somewhat to the threshold, and that absolute loading, if viewed in that means, let me go back to that. Oops, sorry. So that would be a change in the way that those nitrogen values are estimated. Essentially, removing that hydrological load would keep the loading to the bay at that 486 tons per year, rather than being normalized for wetter years. The flip side of this, and I don't capture this on here, but the normalization was capped to where in drier years, there was never a dip below. It was just in wetter years, there was an allowance above. So that is certainly not a small change to the way that nitrogen's been managed. As we mentioned, there are some alternatives to just that direct switch from normalized to non-normalized loads. And that could be in the form of an alternative approach to hydrologic normalization, whether that's a change to the reference period or some margin of safety put on that rather than that direct reference. And
So just,
go ahead.
so I think the purpose of this presentation is to show you where the contractor team is at in terms of the things that they're considering and what they'll be developing evidence to support a series of options for you all to consider adopting as new targets going forward. So not presenting the evidence to support these potential options yet. They're just providing an update on where sort of they're proposing to target their efforts, just so that everyone's expectations are clear.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just the last thing, just in for one of those options, looking at that reference period, you can see that down here. You know, we are having just had my backyard flooded by just a random morning storm. You know, our general trend, I don't have that on this graph, but you can see how many times actual rainfall and hydraulic loads to Old Tampa Bay have approached or in the inverse of gone away from that normalization, or I'm sorry, that reference load. So the other task as part of this part of the project was to take a look at new or alternative indicators, and then with those new indicators to further on and develop the thresholds or targets that would be applied to them. Some of these, I put the word alternative, not new, because chlorophyll's on there first, and that's already a target under the existing paradigm. One of the things that we're looking at, if we go back up to this target here for, when we're referring to chlorophyll here, that's based on the management paradigm looking at seagrass coverage as an ecological endpoint. That's the one that we are saying is under this new nitrogen management, going away from non-normalization or going to non-normalization. We think that these indicators and targets for chlorophyll, light attenuation, and seagrass are still appropriate, and that the seagrass target is still attainable. It's more the fact that we don't have the demonstration because of that loading to the bay to determine yet if the reaction of the seagrass, of the chlorophyll attenuation in seagrass would be appropriate under that.
So on the 3 years where you met the absolute threshold of 486, are those within either the 5 at the 9.3 threshold or the 8.5? Do they correlate that way, or are they actually different years? And is that a function of how that nitrogen is being realized?
Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maya, but I think to attain, you have to pass the 9.3 to get to the 8.5. So there should be overlap in those years.
Right.
Is that, I believe that's how.
I'm saying, do the 3 years that you were underneath the 486, do they correlate to the 5 out of 10 or the 3 out of 10 or both?
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I had that red light, red, green, yellow, and I thought I could.
Yeah, I think it corresponds, I haven't got it, the numbers exactly.
You know,
It definitely corresponds to the threshold, to the 9.3. There might be a lag. And that's what I would want to see, like the evidence that they're compiling to be Certainly the 500, yeah.
Yes, and that is in lower rainfall years.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that, and this is kind of a side thought, but I was participated in the Habitat Restoration Consortium meeting yesterday with the estuary program, and Marcus introduced a new graph to say, is the target on its way up or on its way down? And one of the things that I thought about on these the 4 years for the seagrass target, you can have an upward trend, but having not met that goal yet, you know, so previous years, as the estuary program was supporting building to that seagrass goal, and this is more bay-wide maybe than specifically Old Tampa Bay, but you could have years that met either the nitrogen or the chlorophyll or both goals, and your seagrass is trending in the right direction, that green arrow is pointing to the right way, but you still haven't gotten there yet. So
I think the best example of that is light attenuation. You see, we've had light conditions that are primitive of seagrasses for 10 out of 10 years. But Marcus has pointed out to this group and others, the trend is going in the wrong direction. And that is corresponding with the seagrass outcomes that we're looking at. So good example.
yeah, absolutely. So back to the new or alternative indicator. Another topic of discussion for Old Tampa Bay, as many of you know, is the ongoing pyridinium blooms or reoccurring, I should say, pyridinium blooms and presence of pyridinium, particularly in this bay segment. Through some of the analysis we looked at, one of the things that we really wanted to do was look at some of the historical data and dig into some of the causal analysis to determine if what linkages we could determine from some of the chlorophyll and nitrogen loading numbers and how that reflected in actual pyridinium bloom and cell counts. So I'm going to jump ahead one. This is, again, I think these graphs may have been presented as part of the task 1 report as well, but it's something we revisited. So the graph on the right, you can see is it presents the 9.3 threshold for chlorophyll, and that's the corresponding pyridinium concentration. Those are cells per liter. So we wanted to say, well, where, you know, we wanted to examine where's a tipping point for this, and how can we turn, you know, can we turn that into a management target, and, you know, will that achieve anything? And again, we're still in the process of working on this, but there's some good causal analysis that is linking TN loading and TN concentrations to chlorophyll A and to pyridinium cell counts. If you look further down on this graph and get down to this 5 to 7 micrograms per liter for chlorophyll, you can see there's a significant shift in pyridinium bloom cell counts. And that's based on historical data. I think it's 2012 to 2023 is that data set that we looked at for pyridinium. Certainly there are additional biological factors included with pyridinium, and we're working with some subject matter experts through the estuary program to try to tease out some of those other factors that would go into it. But the correlation component here between chlorophyll and cell counts led us to proposing as an option a target. And I want to be clear, this is an alternative chlorophyll A target that's complementary to the seagrass. We're not suggesting that this is a replacement for the existing indicator or for the target for chlorophyll A with the seagrass endpoint under the existing management paradigm. this is an alternative, kind of, complementary target that would be looked at specifically for pyridinium. And really what to dig down into that further is looking at this on a sub-segment level or a sub-annual level to look at this, to take into consideration the seasonality of the pyridinium blooms, as well as the genesis of blooms in the northwest and central west subsegments of Old Tampa Bay, and the transfer of those blooms to other segments from there. So that anticipated outcome of this proposed target, is obviously a reduction in pyridinium concentration. And based on this glance at the historical data, you could expect perhaps up to an order of magnitude change by shifting that chlorophyll target down to 5 to 7 range. Sorry. So other indicators that we looked at were I struggled with the indicator and the expression of the indicator columns here. Essentially, we want to look at pyridinium as an indicator, but I looked back towards those, what are the management levers to control that? And based on the existing indicators that we referenced up above, that's why I think the chlorophyll A, the alternative chlorophyll A target here is in service of this pyridinium bloom. And so similarly, one of the things we looked at were lake tarpon discharges. There's a balance that we're investigating on the beneficial flows from the hydrological flows from Lake Tarpon versus the nutrients that are delivered from those flows as well. So we don't focus too much on the number there, but the idea is that, again, looking at a sub-segment level and balancing that beneficial flushing with trying to limit that nutrient delivery, some of the causal analysis determined that flows below about 40 CFS hit somewhat of a sweet spot to not totally eliminate that beneficial flushing in lieu of limiting those nutrients. Other indicators that I'll just mention, turbidity. Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question. For Lake Tarpon, as you develop this, and that's my understanding as you're developing this, you're going to take into consideration that is primarily a flood control sector.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I haven't been at the meetings prior because Chris has been coming, so I've just kind of jumped in here and make sure everything's.
So we are also considering Lake Tarpon as a potential alternative water supply. And so if we can provide evidence that there is a amount of flow that is, beneficial for circulation, but a reduction that would be associated with a nutrient load reduction that could be beneficial for an acceptable pyridinium condition, that we would put that new indicator out there that we could measure progress towards, and that those data might be informative, not just for how we manage Old Tampa Bay, but for how some of our partners who are looking to develop alternative water supplies might prioritize certain decisions.
Yeah, and I know that there was that one project that Pinellas County was looking at, and I think didn't make it past DEP permitting, where they wanted to use water from the outfall canal to.
But Tampa Bay Water is currently conducting a feasibility assessment for a surface water supply using water from Lake Tarpon and creating a reservoir in the whole Tampa Bay watershed that's basically storing water from Lake Tarpon in that way. So
Okay. Yeah, they were gonna store it in underground.
that's sort of separate from, our interests, but if there's an opportunity to have a co-benefit there,
right,
that's sort of how we're trying to think of it. But we understand that the Lake Tarpon outfall canal is, a key piece of flood control infrastructure and also represents a historical load that would have otherwise gone to a different water body.
I just
heard
since I missed the first first report, and I apologize for that.
No
But I
problem.
do feel like if we could use anything to support the beneficial use of that water, because it also benefits Tampa Bay, that is definitely a plus.
Yeah, and that's as Maya was saying, for the purpose of this project, we wanted to look at it from the viewpoint of effects to the bay, knowing that it's serving a current purpose and it's also being explored for future beneficial use as well, or alternative use, I should say. So we're mindful of its current use, of course, and trying to be not have blinders on towards possible uses as well. But again, we wanted to look at effects to compare historic discharge and the loading that comes from that to Old Tampa Bay, particularly that bay segment, and tie that back in again. What we're focusing on is the effects to pyridinium in that. The examination of some of the historical data on pyridinium shows that those subsegments of Old Tampa Bay are where a lot of the pyridinium blooms originate. And so we're looking at lines of evidence to see if that is, that's the spot where those may initiate and then be transferred to other bay segments, and what the effects would be for reducing the loading or even the timing of the loading into that subsegment, and how that would end up reflecting or expressing in pyridinium as an endpoint.
Thank you, and thanks for the input on Tampa Bay Waters work, because we're also finishing up the Lake Tarpon swim plan. And the prior studies had talked about drawdowns for the lake as a management action. And we found that those aren't really beneficial from an submerged aquatic vegetation maintenance. So we want to be protective of the lake itself when we're looking at any of those options.
I had a comment, keep an eye on what the flushing benefits of that canal discharge are. And then also years ago, I did a study on that upper bay for the desal plant they wanted to put there. And the tidal flux there it's intense, but it's much lower than the other bay segments because of the blocking, of course, of the causeway.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's case in point, that's why we did want to look at kind of the dual role, those outflows as far as the beneficial flushing, as well as the nutrient delivery, sorry.
If you look at the input up there, you'll see Alligator Creek flows into that area. And it gives some freshwater input into the upper bay, as well as the canal.
There's other creeks and channels that discharge that segment that might be controlling flushing in that area. That's a good point. Lake Tarpon is one that controls plenty of barrier structures that could be looked at that are affecting the hydrology of these pyridiniums that are occurring. So how that's linked to perhaps a circulation indicator that we would develop through this process is something being explored by the contractor as well. That relates to the overall residence time within that region that we know affects why pyridinium occurs in that region.
Yeah, and that's jumping down to that indicator that we've listed on here. We wanted to make sure that we included it to acknowledge that is something that we're investigating. We have the benefit of not being bound by having to make direct management decisions, or being bound by the real world as much when we look at options analysis here. So things like causeway removal, how that affects circulation, how that in combination with maybe an altered flow from Lake Tarpon is just putting everything on the table and wanting to look at what the indicator would be to focus on and how that would be expressed, and then ultimately the development of a target, if it's worth moving forward on in future phases.
So just like even taking a step back of what's being proposed as an absolute load, the 486 tons per year, just the hydrologic conditions that would be necessary to achieve that on a year-to-year basis are extraordinary for that base segment. We would have to really think about how we would manage freshwater inflows into that base segment, because that's really what's driving variation of that road being above 486 tons per year. So it's not only Lake Tarpon, it's probably when you think about how we manage stormwater throughout that system.
So again, still work in progress on task 2 here, but kind of to sum some of this up, some of the recommendations that we're exploring under this task, as Ed just mentioned, attaining the current loading at 486 tons per year without that hydraulic normalization, establishing that complementary management target for chlorophyll A as it relates to pyridinium concentrations. Looking at that again on perhaps a sub-segment or sub-annual level as well. Focus examination on external loads reductions within segments, sub-basins, and concentration on that northwest and central west sub-segments, which again seem to be hotspots for the origin of pyridinium blooms and could be sources for transfer to other sub-segments within that bay. Again, examination of the Lake Tarpon outfall with that balance of beneficial flushing and reduction of nutrients from that. And then recognition that further work is needed to investigate internal loading that may in part undermine some of the efforts to limit external loads to the bay segment, though not dismissing that external loads may be contributing to some of that legacy nutrients in the segment that fuel internal loads. And then again, just the acknowledgement that adaptive management of these targets are going to be needed to address future conditions in regard to temperature, salinity, rainfall amounts, and so overall hydrologic loading at the segment. I don't think any of us believe that these targets are set it, forget it. The discussion of drift that we just had on some of the allocations, the idea that baseline conditions are changing just reiterates the need for adaptive management strategies for Old Tampa Bay, but the Bay in general. With that, I'll take any other questions. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else have any questions for Brandon? All right, well, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it.
You want to be able to clap, Jeff? So I think y'all can kind of see where the contractor team is at. I think they're behind where we expected to be at this point in the contract. We were hoping to be able to provide some of the evidence behind the options that are being recommended for your consideration, but they're not there yet. So a couple of things. We're proposing to cancel the September meeting because we don't think we'll be ready to bring more information that's useful to you all back until October. But we are also kind of trying to be the broker for how you all are thinking about issues in Old Tampa Bay, and how we're thinking about issues in Old Tampa Bay, and make sure the contractor is kind of understanding where we're at. So we did develop a feedback survey activity that we thought we would do live in the meeting, but we're very close to 12 o'clock right now. So I would put it to you all for your preference. We can walk through that feedback activity. It's about 6 slides, maybe 20 questions. Or I can send it out as a follow-up where you all answer those questions on your own, and then we can summarize the feedback that you all have provided at that October meeting. And that way we can sort of also provide that analysis to inform us, ourselves as your information brokers and the contractor team as they develop more clear and detailed options for you all to consider in the future. So I'll ask your preference. Stay late or do homework?
What's everybody's pleasure? What would y'all like to do?
I'm voting. I'm voting for homework.
I think it's better. We'll be able to spend more time on it.
Yeah,
We try to do it now.
Okay.
I want to get input from Chris and people on the structures.
Yeah, we'll send it out as a link. It's basically a Mentimeter poll that you can log into and then take at your own pace. But we'll probably put out to ask for you guys to fill it out by like next Friday.
And there's no reason you need to consolidate responses from, folks. You're welcome to have as many people that you think would be relevant. That
Yeah.
it's helpful for us to sort of know where the resource management community is at on all of these things. There's 2 more items in open discussion. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on them now. I know that DEP's convened a working group to talk about some of the challenges related to dealing with Debbie and then some of these additional rainfall events, but we kind of wanted to save space for airing of the grievances or sharing lessons learned if y'all wanted to. And then I also just sort of want to keep on the radar that we're talking about standing up an atmospheric deposition working group. And I guess my ask is if there is someone in your organization that you think would be an appropriate representative on that working group, could you please send their email contact information to me before the October meeting? So I can start to figure out who the right players are, and we can sort of set up an agenda of what we want to accomplish. And then we can present sort of like the goal and the work plan of action back to you all. That would be very helpful to me. If you have other suggestions of how to set up and get that atmospheric working group launched, reach out to me directly or let me know now.
I have some.
Wonderful.
Talk to you afterwards.
Love it.
She's awesome.
Really love it.
You have like an email of information, like with the blurb of what is it what you're looking for people to be on that work group, or I'm just trying, I just needed to help me identify.
I don't have that. I can put it forward from my perspective of what we're looking for, but I think once we actually stand up the groups, maybe there should be some self-determination there, but I can put together like a quick paragraph of what I'm hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, just something to help me approach who I
Absolutely.
think.
I can do that.
Yeah, a lot of it relates to the CCMP and the action identified in the CCMP to not be overly reliant on atmospheric deposition sites outside of our water to make those estimates in the future. So trying to cite new ED nitrogen deposition, wet and dry deposition sites within the watershed system.
Okay.
Anything else anyone would like to share before we?
What's that?
Anything else for anyone to share?
Nope.
You do it.
But next time we're October 30th here in person, right?
Yep.
And unless there's anything else, we'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thought it was a short one, Ed.
They might say a short meeting again.